So welcome to ESA's Water Cooler Chat. My name is Jessica Johnston. I am the Education's Program Coordinator for the Ecological Society of America. And one of the many tasks that I get to do with my job is to help administer the Scientists in Parks Fellows Program. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's an internship program where students get to participate in a highly rigorous and challenging project while working at a national park. Upon completion of their successful internship, they get to host a water cooler chat about a topic that is of interest to them. And so the topic that we're going to talk about today is actually been chosen by the Scientists in Parks Fellows, and it is wrangling big data for natural resource projects, something that I think is very important, and I'm interested to hear what they have to say. So before we dive into what the hosts are going to talk about, I want to just quickly go over the water cooler chat process. If you have not been to a water cooler chat before, it's kind of an informal discussion. We welcome all ideas and experiences, and we encourage you to share those ideas with us. We just ask that if you are going to talk, that you remain muted until we call upon you. By raising your little participant hand, we will know that you want to talk, or you're welcome to post comments in the chat. And just as one more reminder, we are recording this event. So we do have some upcoming education events, and I'm going to ask Jesse to drop the links in the chat box for me. Jesse works at the ESA as well. But we have two more water cooler chats. One's on October 8th. That one's going to be about very faculty-oriented ecology education after 2 years in the pandemic. So what lessons have you learned? What lessons did you apply? And then we will follow up with another SIP Fellows water cooler chat about managing and conserving plant biodiversity. There's also some great opportunities down the pike for some of your students. So if you could share, we have a USGS cooperative summer internship for undergrads. So you can nominate your students by October 15th. And we're also seeking applications for our Ecology Plus program, mentors and mentees. So there's some links in the chat, hopefully by Jesse. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest hosts today, starting with Kristen Ewan, who is a biologist and a park dive officer for St. Croix National Park. She's originally from Florida and she relocated to the Caribbean, can't say I blame her, and received her master's in marine and environmental studies from the University of Virgin Islands. She moved to St. Croix to join the National Park Service a little over 2 years ago, and she was a mentor for one of our SIP fellows this past summer. Next, we have Alexandra Julik. She's a doctoral research, she's a PhD candidate focusing on raising dynamics and foraging behaviors of recovering green sea turtle populations in the Caribbean seagrass ecosystems. And she was a Scientists in Parks Fellow this past summer under Kristen, working on baseline assessment for hawksbill sea turtle nesting populations. We also have Mary Buford-Turnage with us, who actually just graduated last week. So congratulations, Mary Buford. While she was studying, she was doing research in conservation medicine at Tufts University, focusing on the intersection between human, animal, and environmental health. She spent her summer working at Dinosaur National Monument, serving as a GIS mapping consultant on a lot of different field biology projects related to invasive species, endangered plants, and bighorn sheep. And finally, but not least, is Andrew Birchhill. He is also finishing his PhD work on collective animal behavior and complex adaptive systems at Arizona State University. His thesis focuses on teams of ants without leaders or language and manage to cooperate to solve very complicated challenges. But even though he's currently studying ants, this past summer, he was an SIP fellow going through decades of bird breeding data for Isle of Royale National Park. Okay, so with all of that, I'm done talking. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to kick it over to Kristen, who's going to tell us a little bit more about herself. Kristen, it's all you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So I'm actually originally from Michigan, so there is always a possibility for someone from Michigan to become a marine biologist. But yeah, so I moved from, stopped on, okay. So I moved from Michigan down to Florida to do my undergrad. That was in marine science and chemistry. And then I was working summers teaching scuba diving in the Caribbean off of study abroad programs. And so I knew I kind of belonged in the Caribbean, and I always just keep moving farther and farther south. So I moved to St. Thomas and did my master's degree there in marine fisheries and looked at larval dispersal patterns within the territory to see kind of source sink locations for different fish populations. And then I moved down to St. Croix, like Jessica said, 2 years ago to join the National Park Service. And so I've been here ever since. I started as a biotech, and now I'm a biologist for the Park Service. I do a lot of long-term projects and data sets. That includes working with long-term coral monitoring, and then the Buck Island Sea Turtle Research Program, which is what Alex did her study on, or her focus for her SIP project. And now we're really focused on coral disease, turtles, a lot of native species, and a lot of restoration work down here in St. Croix. I really liked the Scientist in Park program. I had such a great experience working with Alex. The skills that she brought to the table, and the organization alone was extremely impressive. I could be very hands-off and still know that I was getting such high quality of work from her as she updated me in weekly emails. And I think she came out with a really great project. So I'm gonna kind of toss this over to Alex so she can tell you a little bit more about her project.
Great, thanks, Kristen. You were making me blush there toward the end. Thank you. Those are very kind words. So, hey everyone, I'm Alex Julich, and I was the Scientists and Parks Fellow for Christiansted National Historic Site. So what I really spent my summer doing was wrangling a lot of data from, it was about 31 years of sea turtle nesting data collected at Buck Island Reef National Monument. And the goal of my working with that data was to assess kind of long-term trends in abundance and female recruitment, as well as several reproductive parameters for hawksbill turtles, which hawksbill turtles are a critically endangered species worldwide. And Buck Island being one, or the Buck Island Sea Turtle Research Program being one of the longest running nesting programs in the world, it really offers a great opportunity to learn more about, these hawksbill populations. So I'm really hoping that my project helped really build a foundation for the park to continue building upon in terms of assessing the status of their hawksbill population there. Overall, my background is in biology and zoology. I started out at Oregon State University. I'm originally from the West Coast, but like Kristen, I somehow kept moving further south and got down into the Caribbean for a good chunk of my time after my undergrad. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Florida, looking at wrapping that up here soon and next spring. Just scheduled my defense yesterday. And during my time at UF, I've worked with a lot of marine benthic data and population data just for different marine organisms. And my dissertation focuses on the grazing dynamics of green sea turtles in Caribbean seagrass ecosystems. So with that, I'll definitely stop talking. I'll turn it over to Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Buford. I just finished my master's in conservation medicine at Tufts University. That essentially, which is what Jessica said, looks at human, animal, and environmental health as one connected system in which all the things affect each other. But my project this summer, I was at Dinosaur National Monument, which is in Utah and Colorado in the corners. And I was working on a couple projects, highly GIS based. I was working on an invasive plant and a threatened plant monitoring program and also endangered bighorn sheep population study. But I was using, for one of the projects, I was using a year's worth of past data and crunching it into one organization system. And another one, I was creating the survey to be used for field study and then dealing with the data after. And for another one, it was more science communication through GIS and story map space. So that's the kind of thing that I work with. And also for my actual master's project, I was working on agricultural desertification as my topic, so soil land degrading, and that was a risk assessment using GIS for the whole US. So I looked at fire and flood and biodiversity and land use and things like that to predict soil decline. So I can also talk about that. Okay, on to Andrew.
Hello, hey, so my name is Andrew. I'm a PhD candidate studying ant behavior at Arizona State University. So this summer though, I shifted away from the inverts and I looked at the bird data that they've been collecting for maybe almost 30 years on Isle Royal in Michigan. And so, as you may or may not know, the bird populations in North America are like crashing. It's a really big issue. And surprisingly, the Great Lakes region is a really important spot for migratory birds. I didn't realize that before I started. And so kind of understanding what's happening with these trends across these huge timescales is really important. So I kind of spent the summer learning this kind of complicated Bayesian model for community ecology to see, you know, what's happening to the birds over time, essentially. Yeah, and I just in general, I love data, so it was a really fun opportunity for me.
Awesome. So I think what we're going to do now is kind of move into questions. So I'm just going to kind of ask our three other scientists in park participants a few questions just to get the conversation started, but feel free if anyone has any additional questions to enter them in the chat, and you can kind of be having a conversation with one of the scientists in park fellows at the same time as we're kind of having another discussion. So my first question for our fellows, and whoever wants to take on each of these questions, feel free to, or we can get some input from each of you. But what skills did you have that assisted you with managing the large data sets that you worked with this summer, including the one from your fellowship? So what skills did you bring to the table that you think best helped you with your project this summer?
I can go first and other people can chime in.
Awesome.
For me, I didn't really actually get into GIS and data until my master's, which was kind of this year. So it was kind of new for me. And so going into my fellowship, I did know how to use GIS tools and stuff, but actually the most useful thing was like Excel and data sheets, because I had to combine a lot of data and figure out how to organize it. And so the GIS stuff was important, but in terms of strategizing how to deal with the data, just like the more basic how to use a spreadsheet was a lot more useful.
Awesome. Any other skills?
I can chime in next. Some of the skills that I brought into the fellowship was I was fortunate to have had some previous experience working with really large data sets, particularly for sea turtles. So having a decent knowledge of just their biology and how to just manage large data sets really made my job a lot easier. Yeah, I think most of my data management skills and data analytical skills, much of it was self-taught, particularly when I got to graduate school and was working with my own data. I see Andrew nodding his head too. I had some decent coursework background in stats, but I mean, I don't know. In my experience, nobody teaches you how to, really manage data and analyze it in, a program like R. And so really you just have to dive in and do it. And what helps is having data to play around with. And so those were kind of the skill sets I brought to the table for my SAP fellowship.
Yeah, I would say I'm in a pretty similar position. I've always kind of enjoyed programming and stuff, even like back in high school. And I really highly recommend, and to any scientist, to at least get a basic understanding of like at least one programming language. But I think it's these complicated models I was using. I had no experience with those prior to the summer, but I think the skills that I brought that were more important is understanding how to kind of like clean data sets. So, this data was over like 30 years in like 5 different Excel spreadsheets that had slightly different formatting, and there were just entries, because you have these volunteers, in my case, collecting all the data. So sometimes they just spelled things wrong. Sometimes they like forgot their name, or there's a lot of small issues that if you understand the kind of some data management stuff with programming, you can fix a lot of those pretty quickly. And I think that was kind of the most useful thing. Understanding of programming and an understanding of how to kind of clean and manage data were the 2 really important skills that I'm glad I had.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So I went through the same experience with my master's because I had to develop these computer models to kind of project how larval fish can move throughout the water column. And that was something that like, obviously no one taught me in undergrad. So I had to like read some of these like ancient books to try to like figure out how to do it. So I definitely agree on like the PhD side and like the later master's side, learning some of those skills with R, because I took an R course in my undergrad and I was like, oh, I'm golden. Like I'm going to ace all of this in my master's. And I did well in my actual class for my master's, but actually working with real data that was my own, I was like, none of this applies. Like I have to look up all of these different packages and stuff like that. So I think learning the basics is super important. And then also same with what Mary Buford said with learning the basics of Excel, because you won't realize how much easier that makes your life sometimes if you just know a basic code in Excel. Because the data set that Alex works with, we work with obviously year to year. And when someone comes in and just is like an ace at Excel, it can do some pretty impressive cleaning of the data and scaling it down to finding errors and stuff like that before plugging it into something like R.
If I could jump into that a little bit, even just knowing that in Excel you can have functions and have the cells automatically adjust based on other cells. I still have a lot of friends who don't know about that. And figuring out how to look up packages in R, figuring like how to get help, or like essentially Stack Overflow, knowing how to find the answers to these problems is like 95% of the whole thing. I mean,
yeah, using the correct terminology, and like just you could type in the same sentence over and over again and never find the answer, and then you change one word to the term that like coders use, and then all of the answers just like pop up, and you're like, oh, I wish I would have known that 3 days ago. But yeah, I totally agree. And even something basic that I like didn't realize was going to be so useful in my life, not as much for those large data sets, but a lot for just like basic like outreach stuff that I'm working with right now. But like pivot tables, like I feel like they're sometimes the unsung hero of like Excel. but I love pivot tables and I use them all the time now. And that's something that like most people who have graduated within the last like 5 years, like didn't really get any background on, because they're starting to be used more and more. Awesome. So I have additional questions and we kind of started to jump into some of those additional questions, but I'm wondering if anyone in the audience has any questions kind of jumping off of those. You can feel free to raise your hand and then you can unmute yourself when we call on you. All right, you get to keep listening to me talk. Oh, okay. Okay, awesome. That's from Jessica. Yeah, I was like, yay. Awesome. So we kind of started to allude to some of my other questions. So kind of going off of like what you wish was taught like in your undergrad versus graduate school. So did you learn skills you needed for your project specifically in undergrad or graduate, or did you have to teach most of it to yourself? Did you have to do mostly self-study for the skills you needed specifically for your Scientists in Park program?
I can jump in on that. So I'll just narrow it down to the data management aspect, which was such a huge part of my SIP fellowship. In undergrad, I mean, other than having, you know, a lot of coursework in statistics, I mean, they didn't teach us really anything about programming or anything about data management. So my answer is no, that my undergrad in terms of data management didn't necessarily prepare me for what I did during my fellowship. As far as graduate school, I mean, my PhD program doesn't require a lot of coursework, so I spent much of my time just doing my own research, but there have been key resources offered to graduate students on campus that have helped teach me those data management skills. And one such resource that may be found at a few universities, and I know they have online tutorials and stuff in data management and, you know, how to write code, all of that, is the Data Carpentries. It's called a data carpentry club. I know UF has a chapter. Again, I see Andrew nodding his head.
Yeah,
they put out some great resources.
You stole the one thing I was going to say, which is essentially the software carpentry. They'll sometimes like they'll like give schools or clubs or organizations the tools to almost run the course themselves, but you can also like take it online. And of every class I've taken in grad school, this class, which was only like 6 weeks long, was definitely the most useful thing. So yeah, you're totally right.
I think that it addresses partially Michelle's question in the chat about, do you know of any web-based short classes that are offered? So to coin in on what Andrew said, you know, there might be 6-week classes. I took, I think, 2 2-day workshops on basically a breakdown of how to work with R. And that hands down was the most useful thing I could have done in my graduate career. It got me started to where once I started working with my own data, like Kristen said, I finally knew the terms that I needed to Google to solve problems. And that, I don't know, I feel like that's half the battle, is just getting over that learning curve. So yeah, data carpentry, it's a great resource.
I can go too. As somebody who's not a PhD student, I came out of undergrad and I was in a liberal arts small college. So in terms of tech and using, you know, technology for biology, that was less available to me. I think some of the other degrees did more GIS, but I didn't. I did do statistics though. But what was really useful was more subject matter based, because I had to take, you know, biology meant all kinds of biology, you know, biomedical as well as ecology, as well as, you know, basic plant stuff. And so actually the field biology part, I got a lot out of my undergraduate from, because I ended up studying plants for my fellowship, which was new for me, but I had done that in undergrad. but I hadn't done that in my master's program because I was more wildlife based at that point. So if you are at a school that lets you take lots of different types of biology or whatever your field is, I would recommend that because I feel like it's rare that the project is exactly what you are specialized in.
Yeah, I completely agree with taking kind of classes that like you're interested in, but that give you more of like a broad education, because I did my undergrad on photosynthetic sea slugs. So I was doing inverts, and then I moved to larval fish. And now I'm like a generalist with sea turtles and plants, which is a huge focus. And so it was really nice that I had that kind of general background of bird species and turtles and stuff like that to like bring to this position here. I didn't just stick to only fish, and that made it easier to definitely get a job. Yeah, and then for R, just some suggestions that I found was that R seems very scary, but it is like a free platform. So you can just download it, R Studio, and just like start messing with it. And like, you can create graphs that like are little cat faces and stuff like that. And you can just get like used to like all these cool things that you can set up even before working with big data sets, just to get you comfortable with like inputting the data. Cause I know that like during one of our stats, like final exams, someone just like panicked because they forgot how to input data into R. And it's like just such an easy, basic thing that you can learn on your own. But if you're not working with that stuff beforehand, or just like constantly refreshing your skills, it is definitely something that you lose. Awesome. We kind of touched on some resources that our fellows have. Does anyone have any questions for our fellows again? Oh, we got Meg has her hand raised.
Hi, I'm a current PhD candidate at UC Riverside, and I'm very interested in applying to be an SIP fellow. And I was wondering for each of you, what do you think made you a competitive candidate for this program? And was it mainly your data management skills that you had, or do you think there were other things that you included? So any insight on that would be helpful. Thank you.
I'll start. I think I was probably the least suited for my position out of all three of us, but I mean, my position was almost strictly data management. So even though I went up to Michigan, I mostly was doing my work on a laptop in my apartment. So so I wasn't really interacting with a lot of birds, and essentially what I was offering was my data management skills and data analysis and things like that. And I mean, because oftentimes these projects aren't as, or sometimes they're not as concrete as you think. We definitely had some leeway at the beginning where we were going to go this way, and then we kind of pivoted another direction. But it was mostly just my enthusiasm for data, and that I have some experience maybe with Bayesian modeling or something. But yeah.
I can go. So for me, my projects or my fellowship was pretty scattered in terms of, focus on a particular thing. So I was working with, as I said, plants and animals, they all require different GIS skills and different field skills. And I didn't really come in having a lot of those skills. I knew how to use ArcMap and I knew the Esri suite for the most part. I did not know ArcGIS Pro, which was what everything was used on, but they hired me anyway and said I would learn on the job, which I did. So the GIS skills are fine, and everything worked and everything got better. but I think I stood out because of my interdisciplinary background and for a position that required all kinds of different skill sets. And so I guess that's going to be different for each position because some of them, like Andrew's, are pretty specific. But like for mine, they wanted somebody who, you know, could figure out how to use a software, but also hike 12 miles down the riverbank counting flowers. And so I think for me, showing my just different anecdotes from different things and outdoor skills ended up being useful.
If I may jump in real quick. Sorry if you were going to talk, Alex, but Meg, I would say that the thing about these particular individuals standing out in their applications and getting selected is because they were actually qualified for their projects. And so, you know, one, I will say that women tend to undersell themselves in science, so don't do that. Although we do have more women in the program than men, so Andrew's an anomaly. He was the only guy in the program this year. But I think the important thing to do is to not get enraptured by the idea of going to Hawaii, right? And actually apply for the program or the project that fits your skill set the best so that you are extremely competitive. And, you know, like, I think there was less applications to Dinosaur National Monument and Isle Royale because it's not a big name like Yellowstone, or it's not Hawaii, it's not Golden Gate National Park. And so, you know, your chances are better if you're applying to a project that you're highly qualified for in a smaller park than a bigger, larger named park. And to be quite honest, and not to bash the bigger parks because they're incredible and the people that work there work really hard, but you might have a better experience with those smaller parks because the mentors might actually have a little more time to spend with you. So that's something to think about too. And in terms of data management skills, you know, like none of them produced like graphs within their resumes or anything like that, but they did link to stuff. So if you have a website, and this is something that we talked about over the program over the summer, you know, if you have a way to sell yourself, then you have the ability to link to external sites to prove that you can back up what you're saying. And that's really helpful.
One thing that also helped me, sorry, Jessica, I mean, it depends what position you're applying for and how comfortable you are cold emailing people. But for the dinosaur position, it was a GIS position and I had GIS work, but I didn't see a place for that on the application. And so I emailed my now mentor in advance asking if she wanted to see some of it. So sometimes that won't work, but for me, that did help because then she was able to actually see before she talked to me that I could do what I was saying I could do. But that was because I didn't have a link to any of it at this point. So that was one thing I did also.
I'm going to chime in on what both Mary and Jessica said. One thing that helped me as I was applying for the SIP positions is to really put all your effort in those positions that you really do check off all the boxes for each qualification, and don't try to, you know, spread yourself thin and try to, you know, apply for a position where you're like mostly qualified, but, you know, you miss like 1 or 2 points. So that was just something that helped me as I really focused in on the ones that I knew I had the qualifications for. And really, in my case, similar to Andrew's project, is the job announcement, they were looking for data management and analytical skills and someone that had a publication record, because another big emphasis of my project was to, you know, take these results and put it together into a publication. So yeah, it really depends on the position, but I just put all your effort in the ones where you check off all the boxes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like all the applicants like we had for our positions were excellent and they put their best foot forward and even the littlest things that like you might read the list of like qualifications, they like would try to hit those. Like we had an outreach component, and that might seem like a very small thing that like anyone can do, but all of our applicants talked about how they've done outreach in the past, because that can be some of the hardest things for people, is being able to communicate the work that they're doing with all levels of people that they're trying to inform about their projects. So I completely agree with all three of the fellows that putting your foot in the door where you have the most qualifications really is successful. We do have a question from a faculty member. So Bruce asked.
Well, maybe Bruce can just unmute and say
Oh,
it,
yeah.
'cause
Yeah,
it's a big one. And I get where he's
along.
going with it. So, and Bruce is been working with data, trying to teach students data especially. So I would be interested to hear what he says.
Well, the language is in the chat, and no pressure. And I know you have nothing else to do, but I'm just hoping that you could sort of there's a real need for framing this type of course.
So
Oh, I'm not familiar with the Jessica as the ESA rep person. What is are you familiar with the 4DEE thing?
Oh yeah. So that's a 4-dimensional ecology education framework. And I don't know, Bruce, if you muted it on accident or if you were just done right there, but basically there's this, every major topic, biology, they have a framework of how you teach students, right? Well, ecology doesn't have that, but we do now. It's the 4DE framework, and it's relatively new and it hasn't been implemented widely yet. And one of the things that we're recognizing as ecologists is that we have this real need to kind of set out this example of how you should teach ecology and what students should get out of their ecology courses as they're leaving, so that they're ecologically literate, regardless of whether or not they're a major or a non-major. So Bruce is alluding to something more about this ecological data science need, right? So we have you all as great examples of a successful data science student, but you're all in grad school. So how do we tackle this as a to-do list for undergrad so that we could create some sort of a course that is a model for the average ecology professor to follow, so that they know what they should be teaching their students? And that's what, Bruce is, he's in approval, right? So that's, I think, what we're getting at. And if we can do that, like if we can create this to-do list, we should publish it in ESA's bulletin. It's an education related bulletin journal. And he's saying, do it, create this to-do list. He might even be willing to help, because as an undergrad instructor, he recognizes that he wants his students to have this skill set, and they're not getting it at the undergrad level. So how do we do it?
30 years ago, we were here with all the ecology courses. Now we're here with this, and there's no real model. So open table.
Again, I'm talking out of my butt here, so don't hold me for what I say, but I think one of the things that I've kind of always noticed in biology, as opposed to other fields like physics or chemistry, is that a lot of biology courses, they're not offered to really stack onto each other. So a lot of the times the biology courses are really broad but kind of shallow, because we don't expect biologists to necessarily have taken a class in this before taking a class in that. And I think one of the issues when it comes to data stuff is like, you have to have some skills managing or visualizing or processing data ahead of time. So like teaching people how to use data and stuff is enough of a challenge. But then if you want to go into deeper stuff and teach maybe more advanced concepts using data, if they don't already know how to manipulate data, you're going to spend your whole time just teaching that. So like, it almost feels like to me like some sort of mandatory basic data management class at the beginning in a program, an undergrad program, might be really helpful, so you know that they have enough understanding that they can jump into these other classes and really start learning stuff. But if you don't know they have that foundation, it's really hard to do two things at once. But I mean, that's just me.
Yeah, I agree. I felt like in my undergrad, everything was so broad. And then even when I did take a statistics course that was focused in R, I still just got very like basic level, like a few codes and stuff like that. I feel like they almost need like ecological statistics 1, 2, and 3, and like you have to take 1 and then you can choose to take 2 and 3 to like be able to build upon it and have those skills and, you know, run it like that. Because I know with ArcGIS, they do similar where they have build upon classes where you have to take the first one and it's very basic and surface level, and then you go from there. I think trying to shove it everything though into one class is going to be like the biggest challenge, because it's just so broad and you can use so many different programs. Like I use MATLAB, R, ArcGIS, all through my research, and that was for a big data set as well for 5 or 6 years. So Alex, it looked like you might have wanted to chime in. I don't know. No. Okay.
I was going to say, when I was taking stats classes, we were using SPSS and JMP. And I was in grad school 2 years ago, so it wasn't that long ago. So it wasn't until grad school that anybody ever told me anything about R. So I think that if you're an undergraduate teacher, even trying to present R to undergrad students, you're ahead of the curve in comparison to most of the statistics departments. You know, and a lot of the statistics teachers are social science related statistics. And while, you know, they're modeling or they're, you know, I mean, I think back in the day when maybe, you know, some of my older counterparts were doing their PhDs, you know, t-tests and ANOVAs were the thing, right? And now we're doing these like insane matrix modelings because we have such big data sets that I almost feel like we're starting at too low of a scale. Like we have to almost start at a bigger scale and then like and then work backwards, like when we're teaching students. And I couldn't tell you how to do that. I'm not a teacher. So good luck to you, Bruce, and all the people out there trying to make this work. But yeah, I think trying to work with your statistics department might be a nice start to actually say, like, can we start teaching R or Python as the statistical programs that are free? Because as soon as you graduate and you lose access to SPSS or JMP, you're not ever going to hone your skill set any further than that. So
if I can say another thing kind of based on that and what Kristen was saying is I think maybe what's not the solution is to just offer, here's a stats class that teaches you all the stats, because as like grad students, I don't, and like what Kristen was saying, she like didn't end up using most of that stuff. And like most of the stats I've needed, I think probably like Alex, I've taught myself. But what would be good is if you have a basic understanding of like R, and then in the classes you're taking maybe a population ecology class, you use R in that class to do some stats models. So if the stats and the classes were kind of more wrapped together instead of just saying, here's all the stats in the world that you'll probably never use, if you kind of just had the stats kind of tied in with the classes, so you see what's relevant.
Can I add something after you go, Mary Buford?
Okay, one thing I was going to say, so I also took SPSS as a stats class this year as part of my master's, which I also think is a little bit funny since it's not available. freely. It's not super accessible for everybody. But one thing that I think would have been more useful in undergrad, I took the same class in both settings and different schools, which was funny, same textbook, but would be to learn how to read stats in a paper, or same with GIS, things like that, to learn to look at the methods and see what tests were used and kind of like synthesize it that way. It's really hard, I think, as an undergraduate or anybody to look at a test and understand how it's used and why. And I think it would have been more useful to me, instead of some of the random tests that I learned, to see how other people were using and what tests they were doing and how to figure that out on my own for later when I would need to pick my own tests for things.
I just wanted to agree with Andrew. I was an SIP fellow this summer as well. I took R courses for my undergraduate, but I can honestly say that everything I know about R I learned through internships, both my SIP fellowship and a previous research experience undergraduates project. And I think that's because I think learning through projects is very helpful, and it helps improve your memory of things like that. And then I also just wanted to mention two like discrete things that I have found. I mostly do conservation research rather than ecology, but two things that I wish they would have gone over more in my undergraduate degree are spatial analysis and tidyverse in R. So I just wanted to mention that those are both good things for undergraduates.
Ida.
There's been some good questions and comments in the chat box, and one thing I see coming out of it is there's a lot of emphasis on learning these programming languages and statistics and stuff, but when you don't have your own data, I mean, you don't have something to take ownership of and that you understand. And what really would have helped me as an undergraduate was to, one, learn how to collect data, and two, learn how to manage it. Then, learn these programming languages and, these analytical approaches. I mean, all of those skill sets I didn't get in undergrad. I ended up getting in, internships and tech positions. Once you learn each step of the process, then, at the end, you really appreciate what a good clean data set looks like. But the data management and just how to collect good data is something that I felt would have been really beneficial to learn as an undergraduate.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Does anyone else, there's a like Alex was saying, a great conversation going on, and Andrew's giving some good, kind words. Does anyone else have any questions kind of related to what we're talking about with structuring classes? Any of the faculty members that have had success with structuring a class in statistics or in our programming that might have some?
I'm just wondering if there's any faculty out there that have worked alongside of CIGIS company or even an NPS program to say, what's your biggest skill that you need done, or this data management skill that you need done this semester, and can we take that data and use that as a project long semester effort, like class effort or something like that? Because what Andrew and Mary Buford and Alex are all alluding to is these skill sets that are stacked on top of each other when you get to do these internships. But what I'm worried about is the students that don't have time or can't afford to do internships. Like how are we ever going to increase the diversity and representation in these types of positions if the only way you can ever get these skill sets are to do these volunteer internship programs? And so why not bring those people that are hiring interns, not trying to take away jobs from anybody, but definitely bring that same mentality, but bring it into the classroom and go, this is what we need to learn this semester, and somehow build a curriculum around it. But I'm sure that's going to be a tough thing to do, something to think about though.
Yeah, I actually didn't do any really internships that give me skills up until this is kind of my first one, which is kind of funny. But I don't know. I do think that R instead of SPSS or a package that you have to pay for is a really good start, because there's a lot, especially now with like remote jobs and things like that, there's a lot that people can do from their own computers if they have one or their own rented one, and having a free package software up there in their skill set is, I think, a really good way to start.
Marnie's got her hand raised. Go for it.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm a faculty member at Smith College, and I teach mostly intro bio, but the intro that I teach is an ecology-based course. And so one thing we're doing at Smith is really trying to bring research in, even at the 100 level, and I'm teaching R at the 100 level as an undergrad. It is really hard to scaffold, though. I find that, like, I try to hit, start with the base, but then, like, my colleagues, most of them are like full faculty, full professors that have been around forever and didn't learn R, and like it's hard to like pass them on. I mean, thankfully we have an amazing stats department that is doing a lot. And actually one thing that we're toying with and haven't started doing yet, but one of the classes that our stats department teaches is like how to use R, and then they do kind of a project for the second half of the semester, and they're trying to like switch it so that they teach the first half of the semester of just the basics of how to use R, and then hand it off to different departments for the second half to do like an applied project within a context, instead of like, you being taught some social science when you're really much more interested in biology, right? So it would be a way of like, here's just the basics of the coding in R that the stats people teach, and then they hand it to different departments. So there would be a bio one, an economics one, an engineering one, and for the second half of the semester. So that's something we're kind of toying with, because it definitely is hard to you can't just say, okay, the stats department is going to teach one class that will teach everything our students need to know. And we really need to sprinkle it through the whole curriculum, I believe. That we're doing a little bit, because you can't teach everything in one class, like people were saying, that you kind of have to build it. But I think the hard part is like coordinating across like a lot of different people, because like I teach intro, but I never teach 300 level. So how can I get them to like a further level when my colleagues don't know how to do R? So it's that's been a challenge, but I'm at least trying to start them off. And what I found really interesting is this year I'm teaching with co-teaching with a new colleague that I haven't taught with before, and she doesn't know R. And so we're trying to keep the class, our different sections like pretty similar, but I told my students like, hey, you can use R if you want, or you can use Excel, or you can use whatever. And I've been noticing that a lot of them are actually, even from the other section, are coming to me for help with R. So there really is like, I think, a desire to like get practice and get better at it. And I think we as faculty need to do a better job at scaffolding across the curriculum, which obviously just takes time. It's like herding cats to get all the faculty on board with anything. So, but we are working on it, at least at Smith, and I'm sure it's happening at other places. It just takes a while for for the faculty to get the skills. Like Bruce was talking about, like, I want to teach this class, but I don't know, what should even be in it. And maybe there's not a textbook already, and, it makes it a little bit harder. So, but hopefully it's really helpful to hear from students what the needs are. So that's why I'm here also, is to know what was useful to you, what things did you wish you have. All that is really useful to us to help build those capacities going forward. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much for chiming in on that. So we are getting to kind of the end.
Let's see if Bruce wants to ask his last question.
Okay, yeah.
Say it out loud, Bruce. then we can wrap it up.
Well, I got a video. So it's in the chat. I mean, it's like, this is a paradigm shift, what you're suggesting for what ecology scholarship is. And, thank you for your service. What do you think about that?
I mean, it definitely is, but I mean, even, and it's not just ecology. I mean, ecology actually, now, if you're not thinking about landscape ecology might be even less so than other fields. I mean, because anytime you upload or have a publication with any sort of like DNA sequences, you're putting those into GenBank. And so essentially there's this, absolutely staggeringly massive database of anything that has to do with DNA. And, comparative genetics, it's just like a field day because, you find some new DNA, you can just plug it in, see what it's related to. You can just scrape, scrape different organisms off, put them into analyses, stuff like that. I was putting in the chat, like, especially for landscape level stuff, it's great because of remote sensing too. So, there's governments and agencies just getting huge amounts of data across the globe, and they don't even necessarily have a thing they want to do with it. So, I think that I'm always a little bit jealous of these people, but there's certainly ecologists at this point who kind of make that their whole shtick is using other people's data, and not in a bad way, but they can get some really awesome publications like pretty easily, and sometimes I'm jealous of that. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the future, at least for a certain type of ecologist.
Yeah, I feel like the ease of these new programs just make it so that you can answer some questions that have never really been able to be answered in the past. And I know I didn't really see anyone else's data in this group, but Alex, her project was a great example of that, because we use this data set every single year to write an annual report. And then she was able to take this database of, thousands upon thousands of entries and answer these baseline questions for us. And it was because she had these skills in R to work with such a large data set where it didn't make you want to tear your hair out. I'm sure data still made Alex want to tear her hair out sometimes, but I think that, yeah, just the ease of just all this new technology and stuff like that is really important to teach in the classrooms so that people can take large data sets and answer new questions from them. Awesome. Well, we have 1 minute left.
One other thing in terms of data sets and stuff, I think national parks are, just to tie it back into the national parks, are a great resource. When I was at the park, they just had like boxes and boxes and boxes of data. Like all these parks are constantly collecting data. And oftentimes it's just for some very preliminary stuff. But if you're interested and you know what the parks are doing, or you can also look into the inventory and monitoring networks, which combine park data across parks. But often they don't really have a goal outside of getting that data available. So if people are interested in finding data that's maybe unanalyzed, that could be a really good source as well.
All right. I'm going to say thank you to both of you all, or all three of you, 4 of you. I can't count. Sorry, it's Friday. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience. Basically, there is a paradigm shift. Bruce hit the head on the nail, and we have this demand for students coming out of school who really need to have data savvy knowledge, right? And if they're not data savvy and they can't do data wrangling, then that basically pushes them back into grad school. And not everybody is fit for grad school, and that is absolutely fine. Some people are eager to get into the workforce. They're not interested in doing research, but they do want to have these skill sets to make them competitive in the job market. And we have to rise to the occasion as faculty members to make sure that we're preparing our workforce, especially in these big science questions, these climate change oriented questions. So thank you for your input. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you all coming and sharing your information, your experiences with the program, and the needs of the National Park Service for that matter. Don't forget that there's an upcoming water cooler chat on October 8th that's related to ecology education in the 2nd year of our pandemic. And obviously, I'm sure we've learned a lot of lessons throughout that process too. And with that, I bid you all adieu. Have a great weekend. And for the host to hang back for just a minute, thank you so much for joining.